Good evening, afternoon, or morning, wherever you happen to be in the world. We are here today with Miss Makya Little, and she has a very important case right now before the Virginia courts. We're going to hear a little bit about that and a little bit about her views as an independent candidate in Virginia.
Thank you so much for being here, Obi.
We do thank you for taking the time with us. We know that the life of a candidate is busy even after an election, but especially for you. So we'll start with the basics. Tell us who you are and why you're running.
I am Makya Little. I'm a mother of 3 Prince William County Public Schools students, a 27-year resident of Woodbridge, Virginia, a former FBI and CIA officer, and a survivor of domestic violence. Also a small business owner and the owner of a nonprofit, and I'm running to help unify our community so that we can solve problems that impact our shared prosperity together.
Okay. Solve problems that impact our shared prosperity together.
Yes.
What's the biggest problem impacting our shared prosperity together?
Well, in the new 19th, the biggest problem is traffic.
Okay.
We are the home of not just the Route 1 corridor, but the I-95 corridor as well, where it intersects at the Occoquan River. And we also have the Lorton Auto Train that travels through our district, along with the VRE. There's conversations that have been ongoing about potentially bringing Metro, potentially bringing the Washington Commanders. And so traffic and construction along that Route 1 corridor has been just the thorn in everyone's side that has absolutely united both parts as far as Fairfax and Prince William County of the district.
A bipartisan issue.
Bipartisan, by county, by everything.
But that's not why you're running, is it?
No. The new 19th House District is the second most diverse district in the Commonwealth. And that part of South County, Fairfax, and that section of Woodbridge proper has, for years, felt undervalued, invested in with regard to resources, development, educational opportunities. And so there are just a combination of issues that allow other areas around our district to prosper while those within our district have not.
Interesting. Okay. And so for the average voter, if we're being honest, a lot of these themes are ongoing, constant, not necessarily new. If that is the case, and if voter apathy is, as everyone is saying, at an all-time high, why should a voter who doesn't normally vote, has no plans to vote, and has never voted, decide to vote for you or one party over the other?
Well, at this point, running as an independent, I feel like I've absolutely demonstrated that I'm willing to be a voice, even if it's a solo voice. And I believe apathy sets in when people feel like they're not being listened to. And so to have someone who was a community advocate at heart from the beginning, I did not seek political power before running for this seat. It was, I saw an issue with regard to education equity concerning how African American history was not being taught in Virginia public schools. That was my genesis. And that snowballed into other education equity issues, such as the admissions process at my high school, Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology, where you saw a consistent diminishing of diverse students being admitted into the #1 high school in the country. And you look at the data and you realize it's actually economic. It has nothing to do with race. And so how do we ensure these educational opportunities are accessible, especially when all taxpayer dollars are used to fund them? But if you don't have someone willing to say what others see, yet won't speak on, because they're trying to go along to get along or to remain aligned with the party and not with people, what's there to vote for?
Going a little deeper, how did that lack of diversity affect your time at Thomas Jefferson?
Honestly, my original intention was to fail the test on purpose, because as a military brat, I had been in situations where I was the only, black girl in my entire grade level.
Yes.
I had also been in situations where, I was in school in PG County. The teachers actually knew how to pronounce my name, and that was refreshing. And so to go from that environment back into a situation where I knew running into people who looked like me in the halls was going to be far and few in between. There's something about community that I believe allows people to thrive even when they're in challenging environments. But when you feel alone, or you feel, especially somewhere like TJ, where your excellence is constantly questioned and you're constantly feeling the need to prove yourself, that can become a barrier to your success and also to your well-being.
Yes.
So who would choose to be in that environment? And this is where, opportunities need to be made not just accessible, but inclusive. And that's what I want to bring to the new 19th House District.
Is it outlandish or unrealistic to question whether we should create our own Thomas Jefferson as opposed to working so hard to get our children into theirs?
Well, I don't see it as an ours-theirs situation, because our tax dollars are our tax dollars. Now, with regard to ours, if you want to say Thomas Jefferson is a regional governor's school, and it's based in Fairfax County, so you have Loudoun County that sends students to TJ, you have Prince William County, and other surrounding cities and entities. So if you want to say Prince William County, we have Innovation Park. That's a 2-year governor's school program.
Okay.
Can we not add more resources there so that students don't have to choose between a 2-hour commute,
Yes.
leaving their neighborhood friends, to still have access to advanced academic education? And I've had conversations with the principal, Dr. Calhoun, about that. And perhaps extending the capacity with partnerships with George Mason and other corporate entities that can benefit from students who are either doing internships with those business entities that are then reinvesting back into the Prince William County school system. Those are conversations that we absolutely can and need to have, so that we're not arguing over pie, we're baking more pie.
Well said. Well said. Okay. All right. So, you've mentioned that you are an independent candidate at the moment. Tell us how you got to that place.
Well, obviously, I began this race as a Democrat. I absolutely identify with Democratic values. However, I've always been an independent thinker. And even when knocking doors, being challenged by members of the Republican Party or voters who identify as independent have asked, point blank period, why are you, a black woman, running as a Democrat? And frankly, sometimes my answer has been to, basically there are social issues with the other party where I don't feel welcome. So why would I seek to pursue representing under that banner, if you will, knowing that I myself am not included or thought of, regarded in that party? So when I recognized that the Democratic Party that I aligned myself with actually didn't follow its own values with regard to how my race was run, and issues surrounding my race, I threw the flag and said, hey, I signed up for a set of values. I thought we were all kind of in agreement with those values, but clearly those values aren't what you're practicing. And one of the things that I like about the Democratic Party typically we will hold ourselves accountable.
Yes.
When Trump did his thing with the grab, no one in the Republican side really pushed back on that. But when Al Franklin, did his thing,
Indeed.
Al Franklin, you got to
Within a
go.
month.
You got to go, bro.
Yeah.
And so I've always respected that about the party, and unfortunately was unpleasantly surprised that we in Virginia weren't willing to hold ourselves accountable to the standard we set. Let's
examine that a little more. So there is a court case. You have sued who?
So it is I and about 3 of my constituents. So it's 4 of us listed as plaintiffs, although there were more constituents who obviously were concerned. There's comfort levels with putting your name out there, especially with regard to how political violence has become a thing in this nation. And it is a bit of a sacrifice one is taking by literally putting their name on the line.
Okay.
But we brought a suit against the Commonwealth of Virginia, the Department of Elections, the Board, Virginia Board of Elections, and the Democratic Party of Virginia.
All right. And what are you alleging?
So the allegations include, first of all, the fact that according to Virginia Code 24.2-103A, the Department of Elections is accountable by the law to ensure that elections are done with uniformity and purity.
Okay.
And knowing that the Democratic Party did not follow its own policies, knowing all of the things that they allowed, such as voter suppression by committee members in Prince William County, canceling a bipartisan, bilingual voter registration drive in my district that I had worked in my personal capacity with other members of the National Panhellenic Council, with the Republican Party, with the Democratic Party to create this community event. However, they felt that it would assist in my particular run because it demonstrated my ability to be a coalition builder, but they canceled it.
So let's examine that a little further. That specific event, you're saying you set this up with other Democratic candidates who you were running with, or was it just your?
No, it was basically me as a member of the Divine Nine.
Okay.
In my
and
personal capacity, the National Panhellenic Council. There's 9 historic Black fraternities and sororities, and many of them will typically host voter registration drives. And so this was something that I had worked with another Divine Nine member.
Okay.
And what we built was a bipartisan group of other G9 organizations, the Republican Party or Committee of Prince William, the Democratic Party or Committee of Fairfax. And it was going to be an amazing community event at a store that was owned by a Hispanic grocer. And it was right before the midterms. So increasing voter registration, specifically in the Hispanic community, but to where we're building bridges between the Black and the Latino community, it really would have been a great just community event.
And tell us specifically how they were able to cancel an event that you organized.
Well, the mother of my opponent, who was the chair of the Woodbridge District Committee at the time, basically called Lottie Dottie and everybody, and demanded even that they not participate because it gave off the appearance that they were supporting my candidacy.
Okay.
And their response was, well, her name isn't on it. She's still a member of the Divine Nine. We're doing it in that capacity. Her campaign has nothing to do with this.
All right.
And so when that attempt failed, even calling the store owner, saying it looks like you're supporting her, and it's like her name's not on it. What do you mean? Like it's voter registration. Like
so there was a pressure campaign.
Yes.
And still, though, a little confusion. If you'd set this event up, how could participation by these individuals that you are describing, or the lack of participation, result in the cancellation of a event of that type?
Well, if you peel away the supporters, if you peel away the sponsors, if you peel away the venue, you don't have an event.
Fair enough. Okay. And that's all on record?
Absolutely. It's in the exhibits.
Now, how, under the law, can this be seen as illegal? How can this be attached to the actual purity statute of Virginia's voting laws?
Well, that particular act, if you will, is voter suppression.
Okay. All right. Walk me through exactly how you, in a courtroom, might connect those actions to voter suppression, since those individuals didn't actually interact with a number of voters. Certainly the store owner, but if they're telling staff not to support an event, how do we get to voter suppression from there?
So if there's a voter registration drive planned in your neighborhood, that makes it accessible, right?
Indeed.
If it's canceled, now you've got to go all the way to the DMV or wait for another opportunity. And one of the co-plaintiffs basically did just that. She's a member of the Latino community, and she wasn't registered to vote until I actually did reorganize the event as an actual campaign event for Cinco de Mayo this year, where she registered to vote for the first time.
So, would this be, staying with the law here, an instance of creating an undue burden on a constituent, where the executives or leaders of this party, as it were creating a situation where a voter would have to do more work in order to actually cast their vote?
Absolutely.
All right. Very interesting. Very interesting. Well, that's certainly something that I think a lot of people would want to look at more closely. Where can they find the information?
Well, all the facts are literally listed in the complaint itself, which is on my website, makyalittle.com, and that's Makyalittle.com. And so if you download the complaint, the facts section, which is, numbered paragraphs, all of the exhibits are mapped to each stated fact. And so the exhibits are listed separately because there's about 265 pages of them. And you can identify which exhibit those, I'll call them receipts, fall under, and read the text messages, the communication, see the event flyer, and what it would have been.
And so we can establish a few more facts here just so that everybody knows exactly what's happening. So, and I am cherry picking a little bit here, so forgive me.
Okay.
But the night before the election, what did the projections say?
So the night before the election, well, actually, I received a few phone calls from some of the members of the Democratic Party of Virginia, essentially congratulating me in advance, because even though I didn't request or order any polling data, the party absolutely did. And so they knew, based on the name recognition that we had built. I mean, we dropped a billboard in the middle of the district right before mail-in ballots were being sent out and early voting began. We had gone internationally viral on social media to the point where even the committee chairperson was saying, I'm getting calls from relatives in South Carolina, asking about you. We had done everything that a campaign is essentially tasked with doing: building the name recognition, hitting the doors, raising the money. And so when you look at the data now, you can see that when it came to early voting and mail-in ballots, we were clear winners for number one.
Okay.
My opponent that ended up winning in the end was number 3. But all of a sudden, on election day, shoots up to number 1 and wins by 49 votes.
To be fair, have there been swings in election of this particular magnitude? Magnitude may be the wrong word. It may not be as wide a swing as the word magnitude even implies. But have there been swings in election of this type previously where malfeasance was not the case?
I'm sure there has been.
Okay.
But the fact that malfeasance was, and we have documented evidence of that, that can and does clearly show how more than 49 votes can and would have been influenced as a result of those actions.
All right.
That's where our case is strong.
Does this rise to the level of criminal activity?
I would not go as far to say that it's criminal. Like no one ran in and stole papers and, you know.
Okay.
But at the same time, if a party has policies that it's not willing to follow and it's manipulating voters into voting a certain way based on implied endorsements.
All right.
Such as
And that happens
the passing
specifically?
out of the sample ballots that are blue that are being passed out by official committee members wearing official committee gear. The endorsements that were influenced by my opponent's official position that he was allowed to maintain a year through campaigning. And essentially leverage that position to where now you have even elected officials who may want to endorse me or express that they want to endorse me, but they've seen how the party moves and they don't feel comfortable endorsing me until they can guarantee that they won't disappear off the ballot.
Let's backtrack a little bit. You mentioned sample ballots being handed out in a quote-unquote suspicious manner. Can you tell us specifically what happened there?
Absolutely. So typically in the general election, most voters, especially in the Democratic Party, are used to receiving some sort of sample ballot. They'll be passed out by a poll greeter or someone representing the party to say, you know, the Democratic leaning or the Democratic endorsed candidates are here.
Yes.
If you haven't done your research, don't know who to vote for, here's your little cheat sheet, right?
Indeed.
But for that to be done in a primary, where the purpose of the primary is to decide which of those names will be checked in the fall, you're sending the signal, sending the message that this person has already received the support of the party.
And describe
that's
that document,
against
which is available on your website?
the sample ballot?
Yes.
Yes, you can see a picture of the sample ballot in the exhibits.
And describe exactly what is amiss with that document.
What is amiss with it is who was passing it out. If someone from his campaign, with a campaign Rosia Henson for delegate shirt on, all fair and good. But to pass that out with a Prince William County Dems shirt on, and you are an official representative of the committee, now we're getting into your endorsing.
Okay. Yes, that does sound like an endorsement, but just want to stress again, we are not saying that that reaches the level of criminality.
I'm not saying that reaches the level of criminality, but it does cross the lines into that purity.
So then we move on to the question of your redress, which brings us back to why you're running as an independent candidate. Now, so that people understand, you are not suing to overturn the results. What redress or action are you actually suing for?
I am suing for fair access to the ballot. And that is the relief that I am seeking for the party breaking its own rules, for the Board of Elections certifying an impure election, knowing of my complaint before they certified it, and essentially ensuring that this pattern and practice of operation no longer continues in the Commonwealth. Not only am I not the only race that this happened in, this has been happening for multiple election cycles.
Now, there's going to be a very easy juxtaposition. Obviously, we've got a very well-known voting rights and election interference case that everyone is talking about. What is the difference between what you're asking for and what Donald Trump is asking for?
Well, what I'm asking for is really for the parties to be held accountable for following their own rules.
But you're not seeking to have the winner on the Democratic side named as you.
Initially, I was, because the party actually did and does have the power to do that.
Okay.
In their own rules that they refuse to abide by. They can set aside a nomination for any reason, and that's in their policy, which is also in our exhibits.
All right.
They've chosen not to. And so that's where the enforcing of its own policies becomes an issue for me, because you actually had the power to make this right, but you refused to even ask questions and investigate.
For the committee to overturn or to initiate that action through its bylaws, one of the individuals who would vote on that action is related to the winning candidate. Am I understanding?
No, because at this point I've gone past the Prince William County Democratic Committee. I've gone past the Fairfax County Democratic Committee, recognizing that the reason why we got here is because they broke the policy. So I've gone to the Democratic Party of Virginia, of which Fairfax and Prince William are entities of, and said, hey, state level, this is what the local committees did. Please enforce your own rules by doing these things.
Is there a previous case with precedent for this?
There is in Virginia, but it was for slightly different reasons. It was, I think it was COVID related, where someone was asking for permission to have the deadline extended, or rules, modified, so that they could have access to the ballot. There is one in Pennsylvania, I want to say, and so that's the case that we'll be making in court.
So tell us specifically what you are looking to have happen, even though this election technically has ended.
Well, the election hasn't ended. The election doesn't end until November 7th.
All right.
That's the general election. What ended was the nomination process. And the Democratic nomination and the deadline to file to run as an independent was June 20th.
All right.
So I was unsuccessful for multiple reasons in gaining the Democratic nomination. However, there is no Republican running for the seat, nor is there an independent candidate. So at this point, if I were to not pursue this independent candidacy for the general election, the members of my district would have no choice. Okay. So the individuals who voted for you, you believe that their rights were infringed upon through these actions? Absolutely. Not only the individuals that voted for me, the independents and Republicans who were unable or didn't feel it was appropriate to participate in the Democratic nomination process. And so you have a district of 87,222 constituents. About 46% of those are registered to vote, and only 3,000 participated in the Democratic nomination. To dismiss the will of all of those other voters who will now only see, as it stands right now, one name on the ballot, the Democratic Party essentially made a unilateral decision for all 87,222 members of my district.
You've been called a sore loser, election denier, and anti-LGBTQA+. Where did that stem from? And tell us why it is not the case.
Well, I honestly just believe it's the Democratic Party's attempt to grasp at straws. They know my integrity is everything. They know that, if anything, I was endorsed by FCPS Pride, which is a organization within Fairfax County that staunchly defends school policies that protect children who identify as LGBTQ, transgender students.
Yes.
And so it's really, what talking points can we put out there to either shame her, embarrass her, intimidate her. But I've got pretty thick skin, and the facts, I believe, can and will speak for themselves.
And just so that there's some context, one of your opponents does identify as LGBTQA+.
Yes.
And that individual would be one of the first individuals that identifies to be in that office?
There have been others who have openly identified as gay or queer. I believe the only other person of color who identified as queer, and so I believe my opponent is claiming to be the first openly gay candidate.
Okay. I'd love to dive in a little bit here to some of the things that anyone looking to run for office in a diverse community may deal with. And so let's just hit some of the bigger talking points. So, 15 seconds on gun control. Go.
Ban assault weapons.
Okay.
They have no business on our streets. Our military and certain levels of law enforcement are the only entities that, in my opinion, can and should justify having them. Definitely a licensing program where if we can agree that one should be licensed to operate a motor vehicle because it has the potential of doing harm.
Indeed.
And also being the daughter of a former FBI employee who had to qualify to maintain her service weapon as a federally trained law enforcement officer. The average citizen on the street should at least be required to undergo some gun safety training, some gun storage training to ensure that we are protecting our citizens as they are licensed to also protect themselves.
Why do you think the average Republican doesn't know that 80% of white law enforcement officials agree with you?
I think they do know. I think the difference, as I stated earlier, is you work for who pays you. And if you're receiving campaign donations from the NRA, that's who you work for.
Now, moving to another quote-unquote red meat issue, we see a lot of book banning going on now in red states and attempts in red communities to do the same. Tell us your thoughts on that.
Well, as an education equity advocate and a lover of learning, a book obsessive person, and also a knower of history. This is how the Holocaust started. And it breaks my heart that there hasn't been more pushback, specifically from the Democratic Party. There hasn't been more lawsuits filed in all of these states. There hasn't been more voices and actual calls to action from the Divine Nine and the NAACP and all of these entities that we would want to speak up and like put us in the game. You know, you could tell us to get out to vote. Okay, what can we do now? How can we help now with all of these bans? But what does encourage me is seeing citizens like the young lady in, I think it's the Houston area, who, is it Lauren? She's actually a soror, who made an appearance at a school board meeting and basically objected to them essentially banning the school board and appointing some gentleman who is now supposed to be able to call all the shots. And just the erosion of our basic rights and freedoms and elimination of duly elected leaders and judges and it's like, why is no one saying anything or doing anything? And so book bans are just the beginning.
Let me ask you this. Is there some logic to the perception that the right's incessant cry of loss of rights has created a sort of a crying wolf situation where when we hear those words, election interference, taking away our rights, First Amendment rights, Fifth Amendment rights, that now this has become a sort of white noise, almost literally?
I absolutely would agree with that, to the point of there being so much chaos that everybody wants is peace. And unfortunately, what that is translated to is people sticking their head in the sand.
Indeed.
To drown out the noise instead of taking up arms, if you will.
And where do you get your news?
That's a good question. I actually like peace, so I don't watch too many news stations, but I do subscribe to the Washington Post.
Okay.
But it's one of those things where when I hear about a story, then I go look for multiple sources to learn more about that particular story. But even with regard to the news, it's disappointing that what makes the news is still at someone's discretion. What is newsworthy is still at someone's discretion. And so even though a lot of people will be shamed for getting their news from social media, unfortunately, a lot of stories that otherwise would not be reported on make its rounds on social media and force the news stations to then have to do a little bit more digging and reporting on it. So
I was remarking to a colleague about the situation that is photography and black people and how it has been used against us for years, and only in the last probably decade that cell phones and cell phone video have turned into our saving grace, as it were. Do you think that we have a responsibility to be citizen journalists?
Absolutely, and I think even with the Montgomery boat brawl, without the video, the charges may have even landed a different way.
I'd like to touch on some bigger aspects of what you're doing. So if you were to go past this race, if you were to look to a national issue, although I suppose traffic might still be it, but what would that national issue be if you had to pick one? Obviously, multifaceted job, can't focus on just one thing, but.
That's a really great question, and I, interestingly enough, have put some thought into it because I'll say my first issue, the genesis of my advocacy, was African American history. And I believe, based on the things that we've seen with regard to the book banning, with regard to the curriculums, it is time for us as a nation to have a national history curriculum standard. And for those that say, no, that's a states' rights thing, okay, then why do we have the AP exams? Because what you have is a private entity who has a national standard where you can take this AP course in this state and get credit for it in another state. And so I feel like there's precedence there for us to, and reason for us, even if you want to put it into a reparations package, where if we don't start teaching our children from the same sheet of music and focusing on the facts that history is history, facts are facts, and we're all learning from the same set of facts, we're going to continue to talk past each other and to our own country's demise.
Let me ask you, why doesn't the average person connect the poor schooling of red states with the lower economic status of red states?
I'm not sure why citizens wouldn't, but what I would say is when you have federal funding come into a state, it's essentially up to the governor to ensure that, and the legislature, to disseminate those funds in an equitable way. Most states where there's a bit of an economic power structure, which typically lean red, choose to redirect those funds to the haves. And the have-nots not only don't have those resources, but they don't have a voice, because you have situations like this where minority rule is what is making the decisions.
Gerrymandering.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Certainly another topic for a later time, right? But this is Makya Little, and she is running for delegate of the 19th District in Virginia, and at this moment running as an independent.
Yes.
We do thank you for sharing your story with us and giving us the time.
Thank you so much. And you can learn more about our campaign at www.makya, and that's MAKYA, little, LITTLE.com. And please donate.